The boardroom was silent, uncomfortably, suffocatingly silent. 11 executives sat frozen around a walnut table worth more than most people's homes, watching a man they claimed to admire gesture frantically in a language none of them understood. Whispers rippled through the room. Assumptions formed. Impatience grew. A billion-dollar deal was dying in real time, and not one person in that room of so-called leaders knew how to save it. What they didn't know was that the person who would rescue this moment wasn't even supposed to be in that room. He wasn't wearing a suit. He didn't have an MBA. And he was holding a mop. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people who should have seen you, drop a comment. This one's for you. Donovan Price didn't fit the billionaire mold, and he never tried to. At 32, he'd built Apex Renewables from a garage project into a powerhouse that turned solar innovation into something cities actually wanted. While competitors chased subsidies, Donovan chased efficiency. His designs cut energy costs in half and made clean power accessible to communities that had been priced out for decades. Born profoundly deaf, Donovan had spent his entire life reading what others missed: micro-expressions, body language, the tension in a handshake. Where most people heard words, he saw truth. That intuition made him ruthless in negotiations and unshakable under pressure. He didn't need to hear lies to spot them. But today, that advantage had vanished. His interpreter, the woman who had been his voice in boardroom for 5 years, had called in sick that morning. No backup available. The meeting couldn't be rescheduled. The investors had flown in from Singapore, and the merger window closed in 72 hours. Donovan had walked into that conference room, knowing he'd have to navigate this alone, relying on written notes and hope. 20 minutes in, hope was fading fast. The executives across from him were growing restless. They exchanged glances he couldn't decode without sound. Someone's phone buzzed. Another checked his watch. Donovan signed his proposal again, slower this time, but their confusion only deepened. One man leaned toward his colleague and whispered something. Both looked at Donovan with what he recognized instantly. Pity mixed with frustration. His jaw tightened. The deal was slipping away, and it had nothing to do with the numbers. Outside the glass walls, Leo Martinez pushed his mop bucket past the executive suites, trying to finish his route before the afternoon rush. At 17, he'd become an expert at being invisible. Janitors always were. People walked past him like he was part of furniture, another fixture that kept the building running, but never warranted a second glance. He'd learned to prefer it that way. Less attention meant fewer questions about why he wasn't in school, why someone his age was working full-time, why his hands were rough from industrial cleaner, and his back already ached like someone twice his age. The answer was simple. His family needed him. His mother worked double shifts at a hospital. His younger sister, Sophia, was deaf and needed specialized support their insurance barely covered. So Leo had made a choice. School could wait. Sophia couldn't. Learning American Sign Language had started as a necessity, a way to communicate with his sister, when words failed and frustration built. But it became something more. A connection. A language that required presence, attention, eye contact. In ASL, you couldn't multitask. You had to be fully there. He'd become fluent within a year, and now, signing with Sophia was the best part of his day. As he mopped near the boardroom, movement caught his eye through the glass. Inside, Donovan's hands moved rapidly. Signing with sharp, precise gestures that conveyed exactly what he needed to say, if anyone had understood. But the executives just stared, some leaning back in their chairs, others glancing toward the door as if planning an escape. Maybe we should reschedule. One man finally said, too loudly, as if volume would somehow bridge the gap. When you have someone who can help you communicate properly. Another executive, younger, tried to help. Do you have anything written down? An email, maybe? We could read through your proposal. And Donovan's hand stopped mid-sign. His expression shifted from frustration to something colder. These people had spent the last 3 months courting his company, praising his vision, calling him a genius. Now, when the script flipped and they had to meet him halfway, they were ready to walk. Not because the deal was bad, because communication required effort they weren't willing to give. He reached for his leather portfolio, ready to stand, ready to let them watch a billion-dollar opportunity walk out the door. Let them explain to their board why they fumbled a merger, because they couldn't be bothered to find a solution. That's when the door opened. Every head turned toward the interruption. A teenager in a maintenance uniform stepped inside, mop still in hand, looking completely out of place among the tailored suits and leather chairs. "Sir," one executive barked, "this is a private." But the kid wasn't looking at him. His eyes were locked on Donovan, and his hands were already moving. Hit that like button if you've ever been underestimated because of something beyond your control. Because what happens next will remind you why you should never count anyone out. Leo's hands formed the signs carefully, clearly. "Sir, I can help. Do you need an interpreter?" The room went silent in a different way now. Not uncomfortable, but stunned. Donovan's expression shifted from resignation to disbelief to something that looked almost like relief. He studied Leo for a long moment, then signed back. "You know ASL?" "Fluently," Leo signed. "My sister is deaf. I've been signing since I was 12. Donovan glanced at the executives, then back to Leo. A decision formed. "Stay, please." What followed was a conversation that left everyone else in the room completely lost. Donovan's hands moved rapidly, explaining, questioning, clarifying. Leo kept pace effortlessly, nodding, asking for details, making sure he understood every nuance before he'd translate. The two of them communicated with a speed and precision that made the earlier confusion feel almost absurd. Finally, Leo turned to face the table of executives who'd been watching this exchange like spectators at a tennis match. "Mr. Price wants to clarify his merger proposal," Leo began, his voice steady despite every eye in the room boring into him. "He's offering a 60-40 partnership split, with Apex maintaining operational control. In exchange, your capital investment would fund a 3-year expansion into underserved markets, specifically rural communities in the Midwest and South, where energy costs are highest and solar adoption is lowest." He paused, glancing back at Donovan, who signed additional details. "The risk," Leo continued, "is that these markets have been ignored because profit margins are tighter. But Mr. Price's projections show that volume and long-term contracts would compensate within 18 months. By year 3, this partnership would control 40% of the residential solar market in 12 states. Conservative estimates put revenue growth at 215%. The room had gone completely still. Every executive was leaning forward now, the earlier impatience replaced with intense focus. "He's not asking you to take a chance on an improving concept," Leo translated as Donovan's hands continued. "He's offering you the ground floor of something that's already working. He's installed pilot programs in 4 communities, and adoption rates are triple the national average. He brought the data. He brought the vision. He just needed someone willing to listen." One executive reached for the portfolio Donovan had been about to pack away. Another pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop. The energy in the room had completely transformed, and it all hinged on a 17-year-old janitor who'd learned sign language for his little sister. Applause started slowly, one person and another, but it felt hollow, performative, because everyone in that room understood what had just happened. They'd spent 30 minutes watching a brilliant man try to communicate with them, and instead of finding a solution, they'd been ready to walk away. They'd treated him like an inconvenience, a problem to be rescheduled rather than a partner to be heard. It took a teenager with a mop to show them how wrong they'd been. Donovan stood, but he didn't move toward the executives reaching for handshakes and apologies. He walked directly to Leo, extended his hand, and held it firmly. Then his hands moved again. Leo smiled slightly and translated. "Mr. Price says he's encountered a lot of barriers in business, but the hardest ones have always been the people who claim they didn't see barriers at all. He appreciates your interest in the merger, but he wants to be clear that his company is going to partner with yours. Accessibility isn't going to be an afterthought. It's going to be foundational." The executives nodded quickly, enthusiastically, perhaps too eagerly. They were scrambling now, realizing how close they had come to catastrophic failure. Donovan signed again, his expression softer now as he looked at Leo. "He's asking for your name," Leo said, then added, "It's Leo. Leo Martinez." More signing. Leo's eyes widened. Sir, But Donovan was already turning to his assistant, a sharp-dressed woman who'd been standing silently by the door throughout the entire ordeal. His hands moved rapidly, decisively. She nodded, pulled out her phone, and began typing. Leo looked between them, confused. What's happening? The assistant spoke. Mr. Price wants you hired. Today. He's instructing me to process your onboarding immediately and place you in our communications division. He's asking what your current salary is, so he can triple it as a starting offer. Leo's grip tightened on the mop handle. The only thing keeping him steady as the room tilted. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that their moment is coming. Because sometimes preparation meets opportunity in the most unexpected ways. 6 months later, Leo Martinez stood in a different conference room, this one his own. The nameplate outside read Director of Accessibility and Community Outreach, a title that still felt surreal when he saw it. The merger had closed within 4 weeks of that first meeting. Apex Renewables expanded into 8 new states, and the partnership exceeded even Donovan's aggressive projections. But for Donovan, the real victory wasn't in the revenue reports. It was in the cultural shift that followed. Leo's first initiative was implementing company-wide ASL basics training, not just for executives, but for everyone from entry-level employees to the security team. Then came the accessibility audit. How many deaf or hard-of-hearing applicants had been overlooked because the hiring process relied too heavily on phone interviews? How many potential clients had been excluded because sales presentations weren't captioned? The answers were uncomfortable. But Donovan had built his company on solving uncomfortable problems. Within a year, Apex had one of the most robust accessibility programs in the industry. Deaf engineers, blind analysts, autistic developers whose pattern recognition skills revolutionized their coding efficiency. The talent pool expanded dramatically, and with it, innovation exploded. Leo still thought about that day in the boardroom. The moment he'd almost walked past, almost decided it wasn't his place to step in. He'd been terrified, convinced he'd get fired for interrupting a meeting that was clearly above his pay grade. Instead, he'd been seen. Donovan had told him later, through an interpreter during one of their first official meetings, I've been underestimated my entire life. People see the deafness before they see the degrees, the patents, the revenue. You didn't. You saw someone who needed help, and you offered it without hesitation. That's rarer than you think. Leo had learned something that day, too. He'd spent years feeling invisible, convinced his skills didn't matter, because they weren't earned in a classroom or listed on a resume. But the most valuable thing he knew, the language he'd learned out of love for his sister, had been exactly what was needed when it mattered most. Here's what that boardroom taught us. True power isn't the title on your door or the zeros in your bank account. It's in being present and prepared when opportunity knocks. Even if you're holding a mop when it happens. Leo didn't wake up that morning planning to change his life. He didn't strategize or network or polish his elevator pitch. He just showed up, paid attention, and used what he had. That's it. That's the formula. And Donovan? He didn't need pity or accommodation. He needed what we all need. Someone willing to meet him where he was. To put in the effort required for a real connection. He'd spent his career proving his worth to people who saw his deafness as a deficit. It took a teenager to see him as simply human. We all have a Leo skill. Something we learn through struggle, necessity, or love that feels ordinary to us but could be extraordinary for someone else. Maybe you speak a language your neighbors don't. Maybe you understand coding, caregiving, or how to calm chaos. Maybe you just know how to listen when everyone else is talking. Those skills matter. Your presence matters. And you never know when the most ordinary moment of your day might become the most significant. So here's my question. What's your Leo skill? What did life teach you that could be someone else's breakthrough? Drop it in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if this one moved you, subscribe to my channel. Every week, we're bringing you stories that prove ordinary people create extraordinary change. Hit that bell because these tales, they're just getting started. The boardroom is empty now. Leo's mop bucket still sits in the hallway. A reminder how close this story came to never happening. How close any of our stories come to never being told. Don't walk past your moment. Step through the door.